So for the last few years, I've been a huge skeptic of using straw in the garden. But this past year, I've started experimenting with it, playing around, and I can't say I'm quite a full convert yet, but I'm seeing some really interesting things. So I'd say at the moment, there's probably like 3 things about straw that I'm really liking, really kind of curious or intrigued by. But just before I get into those, like, why did I even start playing around with straw this season? And so at the beginning of this year, I put all of my brand new Sprout Box garden beds in place. And when I did that, I also needed to redo all of my irrigation. And one of the biggest things that I really wanted to begin working towards on the irrigation front was watering as efficiently as possible. So one part of that was using fewer sprayers and starting to utilize more drip tape and drip line. In some instances, I even had to make it myself to get the results that I was looking for. And the second part was just how do I water less frequently and ideally for a shorter time as well. And one of the things that I had been hearing from a number of folks was garden straw is really, really great at this. And so last year I did a video on strawberries and everybody was like, strawberries. And apparently straw is really great to use on strawberries because it helps keep moisture in, but also helps keep the temperature down. So the whole experiment got started with this strawberry bed right in front of me. I first put down 1/4 inch drip line all throughout the bed with emitters every 6 inches. And then I also connected a sprayer to a piece of bamboo so it could sit above the bed and mist over top of it. And once I had those 2 pieces in place, I then put about 2 inches of straw down on the bed to see if it seemed to be keeping more moisture in the bed. And like within a few weeks, my strawberries were starting to go yellow because they were getting overwatered. And every time I would pull back a little bit of the straw and touch the soil, it was totally saturated, like dripping with water. That's how wet it was in there. Fortunately, I was able to just turn the bubbler off, and now, as we can see, they are really, really happy. And so that was the first little like aha moment of, okay, you know what? Let's experiment with this a little bit more. So then when I planted my tomatoes for this season, for 1/2 of the bed, I put about 2 inches of garden straw down. And then for the other half, I've left the soil completely bare, just as I have in past seasons. And so far, there have been 2 interesting observations between the 2 of them that I've already seen. The first is that the soil dries up so much more quickly when it's not covered. So as we can see at the back here, all of the soil at the top here has already completely dried up. But then when we peel back a little bit of the garden straw, once again, it's totally moist. But what's even more fascinating is that with these new emitters that I'm utilizing, all of the water pools right at the base of the plant. But with the straw on top of them, now the water is basically running along the straw and distributing all across the bed. So even right in the middle of this bed where there's no emitters, it is still completely moist there, and that's because the water has distributed along the straw to those areas. And I can totally hypothesize that this would be super beneficial in areas that you're planting much more densely, such as carrots or beets, leafy greens, etc. Now, one observation that is too early to tell is, does it help the plants actually grow bigger, put out more fruit, etc.? But that's something that, of course, going to be tracking over the course of this season. So those are 2 of the observations that I've already started to make. I'd say from a moisture retention perspective, it's really, really helping, to the extent where I actually think it could be overwatering. So if we just take a quick look at the basil on the other side, I can already see very clearly that the basil that is underneath the straw is starting to fall behind the basil that does not have any garden straw on it. This doesn't shock me because basil loves a really hot environment, and it also doesn't love tons of moisture. Now, just before we get to the big second observation that I've started to make in terms of utilizing garden straw, I think it's worth asking or noting, like, why was I a skeptic of garden straw to begin with? And I think there's really like 2 components to this. The first one was just, I wasn't sure if this is another like kind of gardening gimmick thing that companies are doing just to get you to purchase more products, spend more money. I didn't know if it was really needed. And so for myself personally, I try to utilize as little as possible in the garden. So I was like, I'm just gonna steer clear of this one for a while. And the second point is kind of a funny one in that I just thought that I would not like the aesthetic of straw. I thought that over the course of the season, it would start ending up getting really kind of like dirty looking. It'd be blowing all over the place. And so far that has absolutely not been the case. And as a matter of fact, it actually ties into the second big observation that I've made so far. And so I personally love the look of nice, tidy black soil. That's what I was hoping to be having in my garden. However, as we can see here, all sorts of little weeds start showing up all throughout the garden. And the irony of this is that I realized a couple weeks ago, all the areas where I've put down garden straw, I have not had to weed a single time. And so while I do love that aesthetic of that nice, clean, tidy black soil, with the size of the garden that I have and the amount of time I have available, it's pretty much impossible to keep all those weeds at bay, and they seem to always be coming back super quickly. So I have actually massively enjoyed the look and the aesthetic of the garden straw, very much to my surprise. Now, what I will say is that there have been a couple of straw or hay seeds mixed in there, and I've had to pull those weeds out, but anything that I was encountering in my garden previously has seemingly been totally suppressed by the straw. Now, the third and final observation, I'd say, is really like more of a question or a hypothesis that I have at the moment, and that is, can garden straw slow down bolting? And so to provide some background context on this, a couple of weeks ago when I was digging into the strawberries there, I noticed how much cooler it was beneath the straw. So what I decided to do was put 2 thermometers into my beds, one underneath the straw and one just on the bare soil. And what I found was that the temperature difference was about 7 Celsius or 13 Fahrenheit, which is a pretty significant amount. So as soon as I saw that, I ripped out all the leafy greens that I had in this area to kick off a little experiment. What I did was I direct sowed arugula across the entirety of this area. But then on the left-hand side, I put down garden straw, and only a very small amount at the beginning here because I wanted these seeds to germinate and come through. And now that they've germinated, I'm going to thin them out and put down about 1 inch of garden straw. And what I want to be tracking and observing here is whether or not the arugula that does not have any garden straw over top of it ultimately bolts, goes to flower quicker or earlier than the arugula that has been directly sown with straw. My hypothesis is that the arugula that does not have any garden straw over top of it, just bare soil, is going to bolt more quickly than the arugula that does have the garden straw over top of it. But let me know what you think will happen down in the comments. Catch you in the next video.